Hello, this is Dr. Mike Brooks. I'm a licensed psychologist based in Austin, Texas. This is my series about searching for truth and life satisfaction in a complicated world. So I'm doing a series here on the mass shootings in America. So one big caveat here is I, of course, do not have all the answers to this. It's very complicated, but on this journey that you're taking with me, what I want to do is try to tease out what's going on here, see if we can figure it out a little bit and come up with some ideas about what the truth of the matter is and what we can do about it. In the previous episode, which I encourage you to watch, I covered the idea of whether video games were to blame for the mass shootings. Quickly, the answer is no. Another is mental health to blame. Well, that's some of it. Of course, most people who struggle with mental health issues do not become homicidal or mass shooters or even suicidal. Now, we looked at hatred. And is that behind the mass shootings? Because that's one of the things that Trump said after the shootings, that it's mental illness and hate that pulled the trigger, not the gun. Now, guns are part of the equation, but this series is not about gun violence in America. So the issue is hatred. Is that part of the equation? Is that what leads some of these people to become mass shooters? Is this level of hatred within them? And I'd say the answer is yes. The El Paso shooter, in fact, wrote a hate-filled manifesto that he apparently posted on 8chan just prior to the shootings. Shooter in Ohio also had posted some hate-filled rants on social media, and previous mass shooters, also there's hatred in them. The New Zealand shooter, there was a big hatred of immigrants. In fact, that shooter inspired the El Paso shooter, unfortunately. So hatred is part of the equation, but if we unpack that a little more, what's behind the hatred? And I think there's something even bigger behind the hatred. There is a relevant quote by Mahatma Gandhi here that I'd like to look at. And he said, "The enemy is fear. We think it is hate, but it is fear." And I think he's really on to something there, because when we look at where this hatred is coming from, and these shooters recently, this fear of invaders, they use that language, of immigrants. And so there is this element of fear that is often behind the hate. So we see the hate at the top, but when we look a little closer, there is fear that is driving the hate, right? Now, the next question is, where's this fear coming from? And I think the answer to this is, it's rooted in our evolutionary history. So I've said before, our history, 99.99% of it was spent in nomadic hunter-gatherer tribes of about 100 to 150 people. So our brains and our behavior, our emotions are shaped by that evolutionary heritage. So if we look at our ancestors who were in these tribes, there was only one tribe. That was the tribe we were in. Everyone else was other, okay? So there was in-group, your tribe or our tribe, and then the out-group, the other. Now, evolutionarily, fear is a very important emotion. It's very primal, and it's important because it saves us. It's how we survive, because it has evolutionary purpose to fear other. Now, when we, in our heritage, came upon another tribe and we saw someone maybe across the savannah, the instinct initially is fear, because that might keep us alive. Now, that other person, maybe they're friendly, right? Maybe our tribes could cooperate. However, if they were not friendly, we could be dead. So fear was the initial emotion, and that could be with a new animal, a snake, things like that. That initial fear response is very much hardwired into us. The way I see it, part of our whole purpose in life is to overcome, to transcend this evolutionary heritage that wants us to think in these more tribal, limited terms. Now, that worked great in those environments. That's part of how we got here. However, we live in a world that is very discrepant from our evolutionary heritage, and they call this evolutionary mismatch. There's a mismatch between how we evolved and the current environment. And that current environment is very different with immigrants and people from different nationalities. In America, we have the melting pot, right? But still part of our tribal ancestry is to look at people who are different than us as other. And once they are other, they can be feared. So that's where this fear of immigrants and invaders is coming from. And unfortunately, it has seeped into our politics and our politicians and our political leaders who really prey upon fear, because guess what? Fear works. Fear motivates people. Viewing ourselves as separate from others is the root to many evils that have occurred throughout history. Slavery would be an example. The Holocaust would be another example. And there's a relevant quote here by spiritual teacher J. Krishnamurti, and I'd like to look at that with you. It's this: when you call yourself an Indian, or a Muslim, or a Christian, or a European, or anything else, you are being violent. Do you see why it is violent? Because you are separating yourself from mankind. When you separate yourself by belief, by nationality, by tradition, it breeds violence. So this in-group, out-group, where we identify ourselves with a tradition, a nationality of Americans versus immigrants, this us versus them mentality is one of the causes, in my view, of the violence that we see in America, including the mass shootings. It's very difficult to overcome, and frankly, what's happening, in my view, is our leaders, our politicians are stoking these fears. They're tapping into it because it works. Fear works. I think of Wall Street, where Gordon Gekko says, greed is good, greed works. Well, fear works, and our politicians use that, and it's not a right or left thing, because the left starts to get us to fear the right, and the right gets us to fear the left and fear the immigrant. It just keeps going on and on. So now we have one piece of this puzzle as to why there are mass shootings. And so now you might be wondering, well, what do we do about it? What do we do about this in-group, out-group thing? Fortunately, there are some helpful strategies, and that's exactly what we're going to look at in the next episode. This is Dr. Mike Brooks, and I hope you join me for that next episode.